Hey everyone, this is Nick, and it's time for the Linux and open source news again. So this week we have the first plans to support HDR and variable refresh rate on Linux. We have new chips announced by AMD that will give Apple Silicon a run for their money. And we have Microsoft abusing their dominant position again to push Edge again. Just like I abuse my non-dominant position to push our open source sponsor. This video is sponsored by Kasm Workspaces, a fantastic tool to stream operating systems, desktops, and apps straight to your browser. They just released version 1.13, which adds a workspace registry for installing and sharing open source container-based images, including the linuxserver.io collection of web desktops that are now streamed using Kasm VNC. Additional updates include enhanced mobile support with progressive web apps, and you can now stop or pause workspaces to restore them later. The Kasm Workspaces Community Edition can be self-hosted, but they also have a cloud service if you prefer. So to learn more about Kasm Workspaces, click the link in the description. So there was an HDR-focused hackfest taking place recently, and plans were made to tackle high dynamic range and variable refresh rates on Linux. People there defined the direction to implement all of this, and they identified two main use cases for HDR. The one where the user wants to play HDR content, in which case the colors just need to look good, and the other use case being for people creating HDR content, for which colors need to be accurate. They also want a solution that allows mixing HDR and SDR content on the same display. In terms of variable refresh rate, it seems that the main issue is related to the mouse cursor. Either it moves at the maximum possible refresh rate, which basically disables variable refresh rate, or it moves at the set refresh rate for the game or the content you're playing, but then you might get a very choppy mouse cursor experience. And for color management, the end goal is to design a vendor-neutral API that compositors, like Kwin for KDE or Mutter for GNOME, could use to program the color pipeline for the GPU. Now, of course, there wasn't much code, it was more talking, but the direction is set and the work can begin on these pretty important features. Now, it looks like the days of looking longingly at the performance per watt specs of Apple Silicon might soon be over, as AMD unveiled a few details about their future chips that might put the latest M2 CPUs to shame. Comparing their yet unreleased Ryzen 7 7840U APU to the M2 chip yields a 9% better 3D rendering performance and 72% better multiprocessing performance, plus 14% better responsiveness. Whatever that is and how you measure it, these new chips, codenamed Phoenix, use 15 watts of power, half of what the Intel competitors use, and less than the 20 watts of Apple's M2. The flagship Ryzen 7 packs 8 cores, plus an integrated Radeon 780M, which should yield 139% better performance than Intel's integrated graphics on the comparable i7-1360P. These chips will obviously be ideal in ultrabooks for a longer battery life, but also for gaming handhelds, although AMD also announced a specific line of chips specifically for this use case. And this is really good news, at least for Linux, because while ARM was pretty much the only thing that could guarantee great battery life with nice power like what Apple Silicon does, ARM chips are way harder to support, and manufacturers generally don't really open their specs up, so writing drivers for each ARM CPU on Linux could have been a real nightmare. But if x86 can catch up or even surpass the ARM CPUs that are, let's say, flagship style for Apple Silicon, then we don't need ARM at all. We can just keep our nice driver support and everything is fine. Now, it looks like Microsoft still has not learned its lesson in terms of abuse of dominant position, as it moves to shove Edge down the throats of even more users. They recently announced that links clicked in Outlook will now open in Edge by default. This is obviously user hostile, as it forces the use of a second browser onto users. It bypasses their personal preferences, and it will use more resources on your PC because you have two browsers open now. You know, Microsoft, there is a simpler way. You could just disallow any other browser than Edge on Windows. At least that would be honest. All these links will open accompanied by the original email in a sidebar, in a sort of side-by-side view. They will also bring this change to Microsoft Teams to have your chat on a sidebar and the link in the main Edge window. Microsoft says that they will let you revert the behavior to use your default browser instead, but using Edge will still be the default, and as we all know, users do not change the default. On top of that, there's a Windows update that broke a Chrome feature that let users make Chrome their default browser in one click. And this was deliberate, because renaming Chrome to something else fixes the issue. So Microsoft hard-coded this bug to make sure people didn't have an easy way to change their default browser. That's a really wonderful way of encouraging competition and winning on the merits of your own product. I guess there's no one from the old Internet Explorer days that still works at Microsoft, because they already did that like 15 years ago, and they got fined for it, and they had to stop. So maybe someone needs to remind them of that? The Linux Mint team has unveiled a few more details about what will be included in Linux Mint 21.2. It looks like it will be all about accent colors. They already showed their new appearance selector that will let you set the accent color like what KDE or Ubuntu offers. But it looks like this color will also be used throughout the system now, including in tooltips instead of the older yellow style, and in system notifications. And I'm not sure how well this will work with specific colors. A bright glowing pink notification sounds like a pure recipe for needing eye surgery. They'll also use symbolic icons to have a better visual style on these notifications. They also warned that an update from Ubuntu broke the compatibility of Mint's ISOs with Secure Boot, which means it has to be disabled for now. They also continued working on Warpinator, which is a computer-to-computer file transfer app. It now supports Landlock and Bubble Wrap, which ensure that Warpinator cannot write anything outside of its dedicated download folder. Mint 21.2 should release in June, and they also plan to release Linux Mint Debian Edition 6 soon after, which will be based on Debian 12, which itself will be out in June. And of course, you can expect dedicated videos on the new version of Mint and the new version of Debian on the channel in June. Now there's a new immutable Fedora spin-off coming called Fedora Onyx. It comes with the Budgie desktop by default, and it's comparable to Fedora Silverblue, which is the immutable version of the regular Fedora GNOME, or Fedora Kinoite, which is the immutable version of the KDE spin of Fedora. So, if the proposal goes through, Fedora Onyx will see its first version with the release of Fedora 39 in about 6 months. And it comes from the inexhaustible Joshua Strobel, who is the lead developer for Budgie, the resurrector of Solus, and the instigator of the more classic Fedora Budgie spin. Onyx will use RPM OS 3, which is an image and package-based system that lets you layer packages on top of a system image, which will in turn create a new image you can boot on, so you can still add packages to your otherwise immutable system that is mostly designed to run apps packaged as Flatpak. And if you're wondering why you would ever want a distro you have to reboot every time you install a new package, it's for security. Basically, you're supposed to use the system as is, and if you need a virtual environment, if you need a development environment, or to run a specific app that is not packaged with Flatpak, there are DistroBox containers that let you run any other system fully accelerated to run anything you want. So more secure, but you still retain all the options with a few hoops to jump through. In the GNOME world this week, developers have improved the column chooser that you'll get in the file manager. It uses newer controls, it looks better, and you can now change visible columns per folder or globally. Loop, the new image viewer that will probably become the default in GNOME soon, now works better on mobile devices. And there's a new app that lets you interact with AI chatbots called Bavarder, which is a French word that means to chat, so nice. This app lets you use ChatGPT 3.5, BAI Chat, and more, and you can just type a prompt, get an answer, and copy that to paste it somewhere else. There's also an update to Flare, the Signal client, which now has dynamically loaded content, and you can now delete messages in it as well. It's another relatively small week for GNOME, but good stuff nonetheless. Now, in the KDE world, developers focused on bug squashing as they continue working on Plasma 6, but there are also some nice visual improvements. The most notable one is how you will interact with panel settings, with a much better, more visual choice to understand alignment, visibility, opacity, or floatingness. On top of that, Discover will have a much better search feature, putting more weight towards results where the name of the app matches your query, rather than using the description and all other tags. Results in the kickoff menu will now be ordered in the same way as in KRunner, and annotations in the screenshot manager will have a visual hover outline to make it clearer that you can select them. And there are the usual hundreds of bugs fixed, this time 208 in 1 week. And I really can't wait to have a solid beta of Plasma 6 to get my hands on, because it looks like a refinement to KDE 5, but it also adds a lot of usability improvements, which is really nice. And we also have the monthly recap of the changes in Elementary OS. In April, they focused on the mail client, which should now better handle online accounts, it fixes some crashes, and it also will always open the Compose window in a new, separate window, instead of in line with the email you're responding to. This window now has a flatter look as well. The window manager now lets you use Alt plus tilde to switch between windows of the same app, and they've laid down the groundwork to rebase on Mutter 44, which is the GNOME compositor. So this will add support for fractional and per display scaling on Wayland, which also implies that Elementary OS will support Wayland in the future, so that's nice. The system settings now lets you choose to switch workspaces using hot corners, and you can dim wallpapers in dark mode. The onboarding app that opens at the first run of the system has been redesigned, so each feature is now presented nicely, with new icons and better typography. And as always, if you already use Elementary OS, you already got these updates, and if you didn't, just head over to the App Center and install them. And let's finish the video with the gaming news. First, we have the release of Wine 8.7, which delegates parsing the shaders to VKD3D, which makes sense as it's the library that translates DirectX calls to Vulkan. There are also 17 bugs fixed, including for games like Street Fighter 4, Revolt 1207, Shapes on a Plane, Unravel, or Final Fantasy XI Online. And the Steam Deck hit another milestone this week, at 9,000 games rated as at least playable. There are now almost 3,300 verified titles, and more than 5,700 playable ones, with the number of unsupported games at almost 2,900. Of course, a lot more games haven't been tested by Valve at all and might run perfectly or not at all, and in the unsupported games, some will also run on any Linux computer, they're just unsupported on the Steam Deck. Still, that's a pretty big number of games that you can play while sitting on the toilet. And this last sentence makes it impossible to smoothly transition to our sponsor. If you use Linux and you need a new computer, stop looking at devices that only support Windows. Click the link in the description below and get yourself something from Tuxedo. All of their computers ship with Linux pre-installed, and they're designed and built to specifically support Linux. So you know that if you install your distro, everything will run fine and every piece of hardware will be supported. They have a big range that will cover every need and every price point, and you can customize every device before you buy, including your own logo, your own keyboard layout, or just picking specific parts and components. And all the laptops are openable, repairable, and upgradable. So if you need a new computer to run Linux on, click the link in the description below and get yourself a Tuxedo computer. So, thanks everyone for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't hesitate to like, to subscribe, to turn on notifications, to write a comment. And if you didn't like it, well, there's always that thumbs down button, but do tell me why in the comments as well. And if you really enjoyed the channel, there are plenty of links in the description as well for you to support it. From Patreon, LibraPay, PayPal, YouTube memberships, YouTube thanks, you know how it works. So, thanks everyone for watching, and I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye!